let me fix this here screen. And now we're working on our 9th assignment called the dice game. And you notice in the assignment prompt, there's a lot of resources, a lot of links to help you navigate through this assignment. The starter code is quite lengthy. Notice that it's like 3 screens long. A lot of stuff's happening there. What I aim to do is break this down and gradually group code with you, show you where each line comes from, and release a little bit at a time for this first week. And the second week, your goal is to build upon that and make as complicated or as simple a game you like. So, to show you some examples of student work from previous semesters, this person did like check triples. They implemented some kind of scoring system. That's totally possible in this assignment, but not required. Over here, the person did the actual like dot patterns on some dice, not just using numbers and squares. Pretty cool. They also implemented their own logic with the game they are familiar with and from their childhood. Here, the person focused on the visual components to have like a simple game of war. Whoever has the higher number gets a point, and then they re-roll and they continue in this kind of battle. This one's pretty nice. It builds on my starter code, but implements behind the scenes a lot of nice logic. You can notice here that 2 plus 6 is 8. Thusly, being a very lucky Chinese number, we display the text "you're rich." And there's other kinds of rules with not the unlucky numbers, you lose money and stuff. So very good interpretation. Other variations, this person decided to make a fortune teller rolling 2 dice to kind of give you a preview of what's to come, random chance tied to fortunes. This person over here made 4 dice and perhaps check the sum of that. And yeah, so it can be very simple and it can get super complicated. For example, like this one, they made their own kind of betting game. Another person did Yahtzee, but I didn't take a screenshot of that. This is a visual. They added some pictures and some nice animations to that odd-even game that I will eventually, by the end of this week, release to you to start with. So far, so good? Now, here's the real focus. This is what happened at the end of block 4. My goal is to get you here, and if not, a little bit more. Okay? Notice each time I click the screen, the dice get re-rolled, and each time there's an even sum, it's even is kind of buggy right now because it's always displayed. But notice when it's actually even, it's evens on top, not along the bottom. Okay, that's important. So with this group coding activity, if you like to follow along, do open up a new code pen, as I will work through each of those parts and kind of narrate through that coding process what happens when I'm coding, especially for this like bigger kind of project. And this is being recorded. You're welcome to watch block 4s. It's going to be very similar. So I have open here a new pen. This will be block 6. Dice game starter code. So when I create a new pen, of course, I'm going to go to JavaScript and add in p5.js, our favorite library, save and close. And so we will get to this spot, right? We're going to draw 2 rectangles. We're going to generate a random number. This is simulating the roll of like a 6-sided die. And then we're going to check if things are, let's say, odd this time instead of even. And then building on this, we're only going to display it's odd if the sum actually is odd, and otherwise it's going to be blank. Cool? In the next like 30 or so minutes, this is our goal to get there. So I have opened here a completely new pen. I'm going to draw, let's just make sure that my processing is working. So I'll zoom in a little bit so you can see better. Function setup. Always need one of these. And then function draw. As with any kind of project, I'm going to need a canvas. So one of the first lines I put into my setup function is our good old canvas. Let's have a background. Let's have it have no red, a lot of green, and maybe some blue. 50 pixels of blue. Now if I click run, I should see a bluish tinted screen. I'll make it ever so slightly darker. So it gives you that sense of, what's it called, like the casino mat thing. Maybe 30. Okay, so we have a greenish background on a 400 by 400 canvas. Good, my P5 works. You notice that I stop every couple lines of code just to make sure I haven't broken anything. This is a good software development pattern, a good programming pattern. And to help me organize what's going to go on in this program, I'm going to draw at first some comments, right? So I have to make some dice. This is probably going to be rectangles, 2 rectangles. I have to figure out how to roll the dice. So how to roll the dice. Also, when I press the screen, re-roll said dice. And a fourth thing I have to think about after I've done all that, I have to check if the sum is, let's say, odd in this example. Check if the sum is odd. If it is odd, then display winner on the screen. Otherwise, don't display anything to the screen. Don't display anything to the screen. Okay, so these 4 things, maybe 5 things is what we'll work on. Let me ask the class, am I missing anything so far from what you've seen? So far, so good? So these comments is to help me organize all my thinking. You may want to dive in straight to the line-by-line programming, but this is going to be one way to organize all these different parts that are going on. And just in case I forget something, I know to look back here and kind of check my comments, not necessarily in this order, but this is like my list of to-dos. Very helpful thing to learn as you're breaking down problems, not just for this class. Okay, we'll go draw some rectangles, as that's one of the first things. I need to make a box that represents my dice. We'll be using the rectangle function. We'll give it a coordinate. Let's call this at 150. We'll make it a nice 100 by 100 rectangle. Remember that Y goes down the page when I click run after drawing in that rectangle. There it is. I have my rectangle. I'm going to excessively comment. This rectangle represents the left dice, or dice 1. I'll need a second dice, so I'll copy this comment, as I'm not the only user that will be making sense of it. This rectangle represents the right dice, so dice 2. I'll be using a similar rectangle function. Let's have it be on the right-hand side, so maybe I'll shift this over by 275 over there. Go. Yep. I just moved it over. Now I have 2 rectangles. I've commented my line so that you, as the students, can make sense of my code when I hand this off to you. So far, so good. And so far, I hope it's familiar territory. Next up is to make these dice. We won't be drawing those dots like one of the students demonstrated. We're just going to cheat a little bit and use the text function to display numbers on these screens. Some of you may be new to this text function, but I'm happy to report that it works very similar to a rectangle. You have an x-coordinate, you have a y-coordinate, and then you have a length and a width. This is like your text box. It's very similar to the text box in Google Docs or in Google Slides. You kind of drag or shrink it to your liking, and then the text will kind of move according and fill up that space. So let's have this fill up that 100 by 100. And the very first number or argument, very first variable here, I'm just writing in high. So when I run this, I should see in that first left dice, dice number 1, I hope to see that the word high is being displayed. So I'm going to click run after adding in that 1 line of code, and there's a tiny bit of chicken scratch in that upper left-hand corner, and let's zoom in a lot to make it very clear. Look, there's the word high, but it's so itty-bitty. It's tiny right now. I'll zoom back out So you can see the code, and so far, it looks like this. Text, in quotes, the word hi, followed by 100. That's the x-coordinate of the upper left-hand corner. The y-coordinate of the upper left-hand corner is 150, and 100 and 100. Notice that the next four numbers is exactly like the rectangle. But it's too tiny right now. Text has a text size function. This will make it bigger, so it makes it legible. So when we do text size 100 and I press run, then we see that word hi. I'll do this a second time. Perhaps I'll move this line up a little bit. And then down here, I'll move this up too. And then I'll make the second one say U. My other coordinates will have to match my rectangle. 275, 150, 150. We'll click run. Now it says hi, and the U gets cut off. Maybe we'll just have hi yo. Ta-da. All right, next part. We'll need some variables. When working with this dice, we have to store whether or not the number is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6. So we'll go through that. Thinking about, okay, if I'm going to process these numbers, if I'm going to store them and otherwise work with them, I'm going to need some variables. So at the very top of my program, I'm going to write dice1 var dice2. So here, using the vocabulary, I'm initializing the two dice variables. Or sorry, I'm declaring, that's the problem. And down in setup, here's where I initialize them. Let's set this one equal to 1, then dice2 equals the 2. Here's the initializing step. Initializing the two dice variables. 2, 1, and 2, respectively. Okay. Lastly, I've declared them, I've initialized them, let's use them. So I'm going to replace those strings, those words that I had hi and yo, with those numbers. Dice1, dice2. And when I click run, if everything went accordingly, I should see the number 1 and I see the number 2 inside those rectangles. So far, so good. We've made our base, we've made two dice, and now we use the new text function to help us display it to the screen. Now, one of the next bullet points we'll be working on is displaying a random number. We want 1 through 6, because that's what the normal dice is being displayed. So maybe at the very top, let's go over here, change the value of the two dice variables to be a random number between 1 and 6. So that'll look like dice1 equals, that's the assignment operator, we're giving it a new value. Dice1 equals random 1 through 6. Dice2 equals random, same thing, 1 through 6. Okay, I'll zoom out ever so slightly so you can see a bit more. And now when I run it, neato, uh-oh, that's not intended. I get a little broken dice. Not only does it display decimals, it keeps repeating itself. Oh no, my infinity dice. That's not what I wanted. So to explain why we're seeing this, the draw function keeps drawing itself over and over again. We use this feature of the draw function to do simple animations for the last 3 weeks or so. That's what got us those cool effects. But in this case, we don't really want that. We don't want these this rolling or this random assignment of numbers to happen over and over again. And another problem right now is we don't want to have those decimal places after there. So on the lines that I change the value of the two dice variables, I'm going to round this. It does change the probability a little bit, but it's random enough for us. So on the very lines, I did random 1, 6. I'm going to put around it rounding. So if you're more than 0.5 of something, it's going to boost you to the next whole number. Okay, so this is the part I added. I'm highlighting it on my screen, round. We're going to round that decimal to the nearest whole number. Now when we click run, we see just the whole number part of it repeating on for infinity. We got one of the problems, and we're working there to get closer. Okay? Now the next part I'm working on from here is to kind of control this random rolling that's happening. When we press the mouse, that's when we re-roll. So one way to do that is to turn off the looping feature. Some of you have used this in your animations. The no loop function just tells the draw function to run once. So here, after the program is run, for example, I run it, I click the run button, it gives me 2 random numbers. I click the run button again, it draws the screen just once, and it gives me 2 random numbers. This is nice. But I want this behavior to repeat. So outside of draw, I'm going to do function mouse pressed. This is one of those built-in variables that listens to see if the mouse is pressed, and it's outside of draw for a really good reason. Inside of this function, we're going to tell the program, okay, redraw yourself. Okay? I added these 3 new lines, function mouse pressed, open closing parentheses, squiggly bracket, and inside of it I write this redraw function. That turns my looping on again. Save, run. Now when I click the screen, you're going to see each time I click the screen, I'm getting 2 new numbers. Okay? You may be wondering, hey, Mr. Chan, last time we used a different variable. We used mouse is pressed, like in your many shapes assignment, or in one of your other kinds of random animation, or like user pressed. How come we didn't use mouse is pressed? Here's why. Mouse is pressed is a variable, and it lives inside the draw function. Now, if your draw function only runs once, it has no idea to really hear or know that the user pressed the button. For example, if I do something like this, redraw, notice I use mouse is pressed, I'll temporarily comment out that mouse is pressed function that's outside of draw. Now when I click run, and I'm clicking the screen like a madman, I hope you hear it in the video, that it doesn't redraw itself. That's because the draw function isn't running. It's not there to hear, or like to listen really to that mouse click event being happening. That's why we're not using mouse is pressed. We could use it outside, that may work, but let's just all use this mouse pressed function. It's very similar with this subtle nuance. Okay, so now I added in that mouse pressed again, and now when I click it draws. Questions? We've done this, check. We've done how to roll dice, check. Oops. When I press the screen, re-roll the dice, check. Lastly, we have the logic. Here's the bits that you've been working with, this idea of if statements. How do you control the behavior of a program? Down here, we're going to say, okay, let's create a new variable, var sum equals, let's add together the value of our 2 dice, dice 1 plus dice 2. Okay, my new line is adding up the value of dice 1 and dice 2. Then afterwards, I'm going to check, is the sum even? Let's see, when we divide it by, or what do we say? I think we're checking if things are odd. So if we divide it by 2, and that number is 1, then we should be able to display that text. Let's just say winner. And we'll display it maybe at x coordinate 100, y coordinate 150 of size 75, 75. Sorry, I got time. Oh no, we're approaching 5 minutes. So maybe if we get this working, maybe this will stop for time considerations. Oh. So my if statement, I think I need to round this if I'm dividing it by 2 and it equals 1. If it's more than 5, is that right? 100, 150. Okay, so maybe I'll just use mod. That much I know works. So sum percent sign 2, if that equals 1, run. then I should be displaying text winner at a certain spot, but it doesn't seem to be working. Darn. Text size, let's have that be 50, 50, 100, 100. So this is the last bit, and with time constraints, we'll just have to pause here, run. Okay, winner is being displayed. It's kind of buggy right now, as it's being drawn like on top when it actually is odd, but behind if it's even. Like right here, it's 5. Notice winner is displayed on top, and otherwise, if it's even, the dice are displayed on top. Cool.